All right, guys, welcome to the Sunday Superversive live stream, where time stands still, but my mouth will never stop talking. That is. Uh, let's see here today. What's the big news? Oh wait, I don't remember what the big news is. I have a book that's been released, Sheik of Mars, an Arabian fantasy set on Venus. No, it's set on Mars. What do you think I am? Anyway, a dashing, swashbuckling adventure where nobleman of Mars, Harun Rashid, must save his bride, Zira al-Zawar, from the murderous, insane clutches of Prince Ahmed al-Shah, a most villainous character if there ever was one, lusting after the daughters of the nobleman of Mars till they can't take it anymore and they rebel against them. You know how it is. Classic stuff. This is a classic book for people who enjoy classic things, but also enjoy motorcycle chases in the dark of Mars. That's very important. I'll be spending about half or more of this live stream reading it. We also have a Superversive free starter, trying to get some of our publisher to Dragon Con so we can sell books, hobnob, shake hands, glad hand, hand off, handle things. There we go. We also have the planetary anthology for Earth coming up soon. Don't forget the rest of them. Soul is still very open and likely to remain so for quite some time. It's still September. Probably won't deal with it till after Dragon Con. But definitely check out Earth. It's coming out June 5th, if I recall correctly. And it's just a great piece. Good cover. Yeah, it's just a great piece. I've got something in there called Ring Run, which is about a guy outrunning a massive nanotechnology. That I'm going to grab my soda here because this is going to be a long day. Probably, maybe. I don't know. I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version of it, not the Cliff Notes version. Anyway, not the long way of my story. Anyway. Gets chased by a sentient pile of nanotech, not sentient really, but animalistic gray goo nanotechnology that's after him no matter what, in a giant, well, still miniature by Dyson's ring world standards, but it's a ring that circles Earth. No, it doesn't. It circles the sun, except the Earth is like the jewel on a ring. With the moon surrounding the Earth. Because, yeah, that makes gravitational sense. Why not? You can't stop me. That is a cool idea, though. I do like the idea of, like, turning Earth into a ring world always stinks for the simple reason that it's still our home planet and people get sentimental about it. I'm going to exploit that sentimentality in my novel Cyber Gothic, which is going to come out sometime, probably next year, the way things are going. But people aren't going to want to like deconstruct it. It's the home planet. Like you might be like, yeah, but we don't know which planet it is, or we might be so far off balance that we just lost our way. I really don't think so. Like, let's say that people leave Earth in droves, like they do in Galaxy's Edge. I would think that unless there's some mystery surrounding Earth that the Republic is keeping silent in that series, it's probably still okay, still there somewhere. People probably know where it is because we are kind of in like, I know space is a big place, but you have hyperdrive, so you can just check every star system. And besides that, it won't change, like, what the star is. Therefore, you search for yellow stars. Like, We know that we're like next to Alpha Centauri and a few other more unusual stars, but Alpha Centauri is the one that everyone will recognize. We can find Alpha Centauri, then we can, which is like 3 stars in a location. Even if it's at a different angle, we should still be able to find it and then get to Earth. As we know generally that it's in the Orion Arm, then we know that it's in such and such, then so on and so forth. Like it's one of those things where space navigation's actually a lot easier than I think people give it credit for, because the real difficulty is distance, not landmarks. Like, we have most of our galaxy that we can see mapped out, and we have other galaxies mapped out to a certain point. Therefore, it's a mix of dead reckoning and what's the word I want for this? It's a mix of dead reckoning and going by landmarks, which is always an interesting sort of way to do things. That's how I did my trip earlier. I had a vague map, which I did last year. I had a vague map, but I spent most of the time hooking around cities and sort of like going by dead reckoning. I knew I wanted to go east or west. Actually, it was mostly west and north, but whatever. Or I wanted to go through the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I didn't know the land, but I knew generally if I wanted to leave, I find the highway leading south out of it through Minnesota. Not Minnesota, Michigan. No, Wisconsin. There we go. Yeah. Anyway. Sheik of Mars. It's, yeah, swashbuckling. Where am I? Okay. So the story is set in an Arabian Mars. I chose that specifically because I wanted to show some of the Muslim versus Christian interaction that did show up in a lot of literature, or at least as a backdrop to a lot of literature, even if it wasn't explicitly talked about in old times. Right now, it's too PC to talk about Muslim violence. That's a pity. That's a shame that I talk about it, because it is in the Quran that you can conquer other people, treat them how you want, charge them like a 20% tax of all they own all the time, enslave them. They can't be a real wife, so having sex with them isn't infidelity. Like, there's a whole bunch of really weird things that protect Muslim interests and hurt everyone else's interests. Murder, plenty of murder. And it just goes on and on and on. So I do that. I then had to explain why there could be a Christian prince who knows how to fight, who isn't like enslaved and forced to become Muslim. Because the Janissaries were like not explicitly tortured, but like they knew where the line of torture was. It was like the Catholics saying you can't torture people, but you can torture them in the Inquisition for an hour at a time. But they could botch it on purpose so that they could torture you again in the Inquisition. It's the same sort of thing. And so what I did was I set it up so that the Sheik of Mars owes Merrick Rashid, the father of Harun Rashid, a life debt. And even though the Sheik of Mars he isn't going to I'm going to not enslave people or have a harem or tax people or anything like that. He is going to like turn a blind eye to it. So I have it so that there's a great scene, which I personally like, where Harun meets with the Sheik of Mars. And I think I'll actually read this part out. It was either this or the motorcycle chase. Actually, no, I'll read the motorcycle chase later on and then read this as well, just to see how it goes. Maybe the genie scene, or at least a little bit of it. Where he meets him and he goes, your father saved my life, therefore I have been so merciful to you, these people who have been under my heel. Then he goes, well, that was clearly a mistake, and one I should rectify, as they tend to do these things. As they tend to say, evil overlord, blah, 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 evil. Um, I like the idea, though. I like it where there's an unrepentant villain, but he's not just like King Dick of the Seven Armies. He's an actual, like, person with, like, different motivations, but he still maintains his villainy. Like, it's hard to say that, like, just he's a person. Like, Sauron is, like, people, I have heard complaints about Sauron not being much of a character. Well, the problem is that Sauron is his own character, and he is what he needs to be, and he works within the story, which is why those complaints kind of get but his motivations are about domination, about preserving himself, about gaining more power. Like, he isn't even human, therefore he doesn't have any human wants or needs. He's not driven by romance or love or anything like that. He is anti-love. And he's basically stepping into the shoes of his daddy, Morgoth. Not literal daddy, but, boss, former king, whatever you want to call it. I like that. I like that as a concept. I like that unrepentant attitude, that he is right according to the morality that he himself follows, whether it's right or wrong. Of course, as Christians, assuming my watchers are Christians, what was I going to say? Right. Our morality is correct because we worship the correct God. Muslims saying that Allah, God, Yahweh, is the same God. No. For one, you can take a look and see how he treats his non-followers in every different religion, just to see Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, to see, like, you don't move from they can stay, but they better mind their business in Judaism, to, hey, love everyone, don't be stupid, and spread the gospel to all nations, to kill everyone who isn't you and won't repent. Huh. I don't, there's a bit of a jump there, isn't there? To have the Prince of Mars have the complete, like, Christian package, even though it doesn't really witness to people because it's not that kind of situation. Besides that, witnessing to people in literature, like trying to write down something that the spirit gives you, mostly, unconsciously, it doesn't work. Not really. Not in the sense that you might, like, think of it as, because you can do the emotional beats, but you can't get the logical beats. And if you do even a little bit wrong, it turns out real cringy. Versus somebody who himself is as complete morality, even though he's wrong from the protagonist's perspective in many different ways beyond. He's a protagonist, therefore we root for him. Is just interesting. I also like how I did the language and lyricism of the words, where I mimicked the old way that they used to write Victorian fiction and then set it in Arabia, where everything's fancy and ornate and emotional. People have flashing eyes. There's power in words. And I don't mean like magic power, like if you know the true name of something. No. It's more of like wizards and witchcraft and all that jazz, but people also have a certain power to heroism to overcome those witchcraft and genies and all that jazz that sort of pops in. There's also like a certain level of sexiness to it that isn't like explicit sexiness, but I don't know whether it's just how I like it, with like veils and dresses and stuff like that. But it's not like Victorian ornateness like you get from steampunk sexiness, but rather it's a sort of like exoticness. But it's not covered by the niqab or anything like that. It's like, silk bikinis, essentially. with like gossamer robes, the good stuff. Uh, and I don't really, I put it in where it's appropriate to be put in. For the wedding that I show in chapter 3, it's not sexy. But when they get to the harem, it gets sexy because that's how it's supposed to be. It's a harem. It's a different situation. I also think I did the sword fights all right. There's not much else I can really say about it because I'm sort of on my own here, which suits me fine for a lot of things, but it's hard to sort of get a good vibe going. Inspirations. I was inspired a lot by the Victorian, 1001 Nights translations, that sort of thing, Vathek, and others like it. I was inspired by pulps, Amazon, Argonauts of the Amazon, anything by William Hope Hodgson, Conan the Barbarian a little bit. Honestly, it's not very good at Conan the Barbarian. I'm sure Conan would be like, if it weren't for your sword play, I'd consider you a fop. You still kind of are. And he's like, okay. The name, the original name of Sheik of Mars was In the Seraglio of the Sheik of Mars, and it was inspired by Agatha Heterodyne Girl Genius, where there is a book called In the Seraglio of the Iron Sheik, which is, and the Iron Sheik, I believe, no, he doesn't come from Mars in that story. Never mind. There's other Martian things in that story. It's pretty cool. But it's sort of like one of those things where like it's in the library, and it's like, oh, what's this? Oh, you don't want that one. I'm just going to put it. You know what? I'm actually going to keep it with myself, and you're a little bit young for this one, kid. Not that Sheik of Mars is that risque. But it does imply a lot of things, and I do describe the clothing and the dress and the attitudes of the various characters in it. I was also a little bit inspired by Count of Monte Cristo, and not in a very explicit way, but in the sense of like various characters pushed on in the tracks that they've set for themselves. Like the villains in the Count of Monte Cristo, some regret, some don't. This is on the don't regret sort of thing. It's also inspired by Ben Bova's Mars series, which are about scientists getting to Mars and setting up a colony of sorts, a scientific one, because they find alien technology. Ben Bova is diamond hard SF, and it doesn't put in too much politics in it, so I do recommend it. And he generally takes a very pro-technology stance. Anything by Ben Bova really isn't that bad. I like his Saturn series best because that's more out of Earth. I can take hard sci-fi like The Martian and other things. I wasn't really inspired by The Martian as much, though it is. I'm sure there's some things in there. Like it's just not sort of what I look for. But I do prefer fancier things. Like I don't need an explanation for technology. And the perspective on that is I don't know how to make a computer. I know that electrons and electricity moving through circuits, hitting various gates and not gates, creates data transfer, hit zero ones, all that jazz. I can't even describe it properly. Therefore, even though I know it's not magic, it might as well be. If this computer just falls apart, I might be able to repair some of it, like replace the power supply or something like that. But I don't understand, as well as I probably should, the workings of it. I am okay with that technology understanding in my literature. And I write that way too. Like if I need to write something hard SF, It's going to be one of those things where it'll take me a year, mostly because I now have to understand the technology to write it. I can't just fact check it later because people will be able to tell through my writing that I have no idea what I'm talking about. You can't, like, there's some things you can fake it until you make it, like confidence. If you're confident all the time in just the right way, even if you're not confident on the inside, no one will be able to tell. But with writing, slip ups are exaggerated to people who are looking for technical accuracy. The suspension of disbelief is lost if it's poorly done. Yep. I've got some like Monster Girl encyclopedias. I'm gonna have to hide those from my kids when I make them. Oh no, this is for daddy kids. When you're older, you'll understand. Why is that woman half a snake? Don't you ask questions, Johnny. Don't you do it. Uh, I Japanese light novels and stuff like that. I've read a few, but they don't inspire me at all. They don't. I mostly read them for my enjoyment, but most of it's power fantasy. I don't think this is much of a power fantasy because it's like the main character isn't me, isn't connected to me, isn't really the same sort of person. I'm not much of a poet. Um, I'm not much of a sword fighter. I'm not a 15-year-old Arabian nobleman on Mars. The only thing that sort of connects us is the Christianity. Um, yeah, that's really all I can think of to say about it now. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in chat or anything like that. I know one of them's me. I could have a conversation with myself, but I'm already doing that. Let's talk about our sponsors, and then we'll move on to the reading. Our sponsors, Supernatural Clothiers Incorporated, serving vampires and the supernatural elite since Paris 1799. Never look anything less than your undead best. Perfect for pretentious dinner and dangerous dinner parties, murderous masked balls, and the classic, a funeral where you aren't really dead, except in the legal sense. Yeah, that's a good sponsor. They paid a lot for that. All right, let me bring this up here. I'll skip around a little bit because probably some things are a little bit more boring than I like to admit. Though nothing's boring. Nothing at all. Never. Prologue. I, who am the slave who copied down the Sheik of Mars speeches at the flying golden palace of the Emir of Saturn, have taken great pains to faithfully record every syllable as the great and noble Lord said them. As he gestured, paced, and narrated with such emotion as can never be transcribed, we saw true tears in his eyes at the deaths of his friends. We heard the note of triumph he must have had as a young warrior enacting his fearful vengeance. The manly voice quavered at the description of his bride being torn from him on his wedding night, and we became misty-eyed in sympathy. His weathered hands gripped at his legendary nanotech sword at his side and made motions as if he were a young man again and fighting his foes once more. I, who am but a slave in the libraries of Saturn, the greatest library in all 9 worlds and countless asteroids, have done my utmost to do perfect justice and honor to the great man's tale. Let this come before all lovers of virtue, justice, and fortitude, and reinforce their souls to deeds no less than what I have preserved for all mankind and for all time. Chapter 1. The Dandy Prince. This is the story that the Sheik of Mars, Harun Rashid, told on the night of his daughter's wedding to Jasper Silver, notorious privateer. He had made the multi-million-mile journey to the Emir of Kronos, who ruled Saturn, to celebrate, and, as at all his children's weddings, he told this story. Noble Emir, my cousin and friend, please accommodate and forgive my wordiness. The story is not short, but it needs to be told, because I am an old man. If my story is forgotten, it will not be because I failed to tell it. At the beginning, I was a young man, barely bearded, and only a man under the law and not at heart. Indeed, I was boyish. In stature, I was a man, clean-limbed and tall. I had flashing eyes full of my fury, and with a sword I had few rivals. For poetry and storytelling I was peerless among my family and their servants. For fashion I dressed a little bit dandily, but made sure to attempt the military bearing that the princes of Mars found fashionable. Our family had risen to one of the richest families from the poorest due to the wisdom and cunning of my grandfather, Munim Rashid, who had been gifted by God with such gifts as those who make money need. We then joined the ranks of nobility through my father, Malik Rashid, who did great deeds for the Sheik of Mars in times past, and even saved his very life in the war against the Caliph of the North Pole. We had traveled from our land in the barren southern plains of Mars to the regions closer to Olympus Mons, the capital of Mars, where the Sheik of Mars held court. Southeast of the largest volcano of the solar system, in Hestia, we set our family. Through his dealings with the nobles around him, he became governor of the province. I sat at meat with my dearest friend Ibrahim and my grandfather, both people I held closer to my heart than my own lifeblood and soul. Ibrahim was a free man, though born a slave and bought to be my boon companion. They succeeded. I was able to free him and his family, but such was his loyalty to me that he stayed, and was, rumor had it, to be arranged to marry a cousin of mine. His family would be raised even as mine had, from obscurity to what we may call happiness. He, being of more warlike mind than I, was a captain of our family's guard. His face held a naturally wolfen cast, with a sardonic smile and sharp eyes. I never knew him to be malicious to me. At this lunch, wherein the servants had arranged all good things, my family ate and cool water with ice, which was a luxury, besides the sweet fruits and sweetmeats, which were arrayed liberally. Anything we did not eat was given to the servants and then the poor. A slave in our house ate better than any free man. I was being petulant. I had a great burden on my mind and my heart. I had seen the most delicate flower in all of Mars and all the solar system, Zira al Zuwar. Yes, even she who I named my last daughter after. I was with Ibrahim in the market. We were purchasing such goods as were necessary for the security of our house, when I turned aside, exhausted by the labors. Sitting on the side of a fountain which spewed a hologram of water rather than the real thing, I saw her. She stood in the midst of many servants and a eunuch with a great sword and diverse sidearms for her protection. She was in the middle of giving alms to the poor. Her eyes were gentle and wise, with perfect grooming of her eyebrows. She wore the traditional headdresses and body coverings of our people. Many keep it pure black out of devotion to a religion that was dying even then. She had, with wondrously skilled fingers, decorated her own with the most delicate of designs. Flowers bloomed in geodesic patterns mesmerized my eyes. Her chin was pointed, her cheekbones high, her nose so perfectly straight that I could test a ruler by it, and it flared to perfectly proportioned nostrils. She had a lighter skin tone than mine, and she was made fairer from the flush of red that colored her cheeks as gently as any makeup. I could tell her figure was not like some who use that covering to hide the ugliness of body and soul. Her feet, which would peek out with each dainty step, were delicate and perfectly shod in wondrously embroidered green sandals. I turned to an old man who was likewise sitting at the holographic fountain, and asked about the wondrous girl in front of me, if he knew her. Ah, young prince, that is Zira al-Zuwar. I motioned for him to go on, praising the old man for his knowledge. She is the daughter of Sheik al-Zuwar, who rules this province below this one. He keeps this house for his daughters, as he wishes them to be, of all things, educated. He wants them to have culture and skills beyond what is expected of all fair members of our race. She herself decorated her clothes in the clothes of her maidservants. I motioned for the old man to continue. She is generous to the poor, and her father bemoans that her charity is sending him to the poorhouse. Allah be praised. But strange enough, she is an infidel, a Christian. She must break her father's heart. At this, my heart soared, and my family has been Christian for generations, and a match to such a girl. I stood to make some introductions of myself, or, catching myself, I thought to send the old man as a proxy, as he may have an in with the family. He arrested me, tugging at my sleeve. Hold, O prince, and forgive my impertinence, but do not approach her, or ask her servant to do so. She is guarded by a fierce and swarthy eunuch. You see him with the sword. The eunuch turned to us as if he had heard the old man. He gave me a stare with the pupils as black as the night and eyeballs as white as lightning. I could not meet his eyes, such were their intensity. I quailed, but knowing this feeling was unmanly and a pox upon my own heart, I rallied and went forward. Despite the murderous rage that flowed from those eyes towards me, I was an inch from touching the throng that had come to receive what alms and food she gave out. But when she turned to the eunuch and motioned, he boomed out in a great basso voice that shook me. Make way! The lady passes! Move, dogs! She motioned and whispered in his ear, If you would be so kind. After this, the throng dispersed, but I could not move forward for the press like a salmon swimming against the current. I despaired of reaching her, but Zira turned and met me eye to eye. Her eyes widened. I made a gesture of genteel greeting. Then she cast aside her eyes downward. She hurried on away from me. The eunuch smote me with another stare, and I found myself rooted in one spot. By the time I had recovered my senses, they were too far away to pursue with any dignity. Ibrahim stood next to me and laughed. What a beauty, but such a fierce guard dog. Even I was intimidated, and I did not endure the full focus. Let's see. We left, but Zira weighed on my mind like a millstone. I found that I had fallen in love with her. Let's see here. That's not all the first chapter. But let's move. There we go. I'm going to skip ahead to chapter 4, marriage, which is about the guy's marriage to Zira. I'm going to skip ahead. Let's see. A little bit of water. The members of our party were scandalizing us with cheeky demands we should leave the party for quarters more private, when our joy was foully interrupted. Motorcycle riders in a anarchic livery of bandits, but too finely made to be the machines for mere raiders, burst through the crowd and up into the table where my bride and I sat. I rose to meet them, but befuddled by the wine that I had drunk and entangled in the fabric of my wife's dress, I could not draw my sword in time. I was struck and rendered nearly insensible. The rider took Zira from my arms even as I cried out for aid. I saw his mad, flashing eyes through his goggles and knew him for the son of the Sheik of Mars, Ahmed al-Shah. I could sense a laconic sneer. Perhaps that snake had planned all this since the garden, or even before then. I put my hate through my eyes and he blinked. We became distracted. The moment lasted a second, but to us both it lasted an hour. Leon and Ibrahim had risen, but one of the riders kicked the table and knocked him down underneath it. They roared off even as I reached out to attempt to arrest their flight. I gripped a bit of fabric and pulled off a part of Zira's train, but it did nothing to stop them. They laughed as they roared into the Martian night. I heard my wife scream out to me, but I could do nothing but reach out as I slipped into unconsciousness. Chapter 5, The Midnight Race. I was revived mere minutes later. Ibrahim had untangled himself and nursed me back to consciousness. I cried out Zira's name when I became aware. The look of deep sorrow on his face told me all. No servant had forsworn celebratory drink, and even the guards had decided that it showed more disloyalty to the family to stay sober than to be celebrating with us. The guards did not have their military equipment to stop them, being dressed in livery rather than armor. After Ibrahim revived me and set me on my feet, I looked about me. My eyes were weeping, and I knew not what to do. What did I, who had lived in luxury despite my detailed and harsh education, have to do with combat and chasing? Nothing had ever been taken from me before by an enemy. I had been secure in the strength of my father and grandfather, who had treated me far too gently. Ah, fool that I was. I froze when action was most needed. My father had gotten up and ran to the injured, making sure that first aid got to the worst hurt first. Grandfather tugged his beard and stamped his foot. He shouted at people to find his new granddaughter-in-law. Sheik al-Zuar bellowed and had to be held back by his servants and remaining daughters. I saw the corpse of the priest, his neck broken, crucifix missing, as somebody put a cloth over his contorted face. I cried out to Ibrahim with a harsh voice when I found the will. My brother, did you see where the prince took her? How long ago was it? I pushed through the pain of the chaos and brouhaha and found my manhood. Ibrahim shoved some drink to my lips, and my head became clear as day. I could walk straight. My wound had been bound while I was unconscious and ached a little. It only ached a little. The armor I had been wearing was ceremonial, but it had been enough to turn the blade, blow aside from reaching any of my vital organs. Ibrahim led me aside. The swarthy eunuch that attended Zira had already prepared motorcycles for us from my family's garage. I cast off the clothing of marriage and put on real armor, and girded myself with weapons that would suit motorcycle combat, the pistol and saber. As I did this, Ibrahim spoke to me. My brother, would that I have been in your place to take the blow on my own heart and body. We are fortunate. There was a camera drone nearby, recording your formerly joyous day, which caught the direction of their leaving, once outside Hestia. They go towards Olympus Mons. Harun. Who could it be but Prince Ahmed al-Shah, driven mad by his passions? I cursed the low-born prince for his cruelty and lust. I had half expected him to make some sort of drama, typical of his personality, but this level of violence shocked me. Weddings, funerals, and christenings were considered sacred on Mars for Muslims and Christians alike. Even lawless raiders respected this. I put on brown and red cloth pants with darkened steel greaves on my legs. Ibrahim and the eunuch put the chest piece on me. I wrapped a turban about my helmet with black cloth and put on a face mask to protect myself from the detritus that would be flung up by our race to beat them to Olympus Mons. Even with the environment under our control, sandstorms could still arise and strip our flesh without any care for status. Lastly, against the cold, I covered all my exposed flesh with warm black wool and an electric heater as thin as a strip of linen. I could sense Olympus Mons in the distance. We pointed towards the black hulking shadow in the stars. I squinted, and in the very far distance I saw Olympus Mons, the city. A few bright lights could pierce the distance between us and the sprawl. I wondered at it as our motley built speed to pursue those who had taken my bride. Let's see. I describe Martian geography. I don't think you want that too much. At breakneck speed, my companions and I reached the canyons of the Jinn. We were rewarded for our haste by a glimpse of the headlights reflected on the canyon walls. My heart leaped, and we pushed our bikes to greater swiftness. My eyes had dried, and I felt a murderous determination in my heart. My family spared no expense on our bikes. They were as well made as the Sheik of Mars' own, and powered by nuclear batteries. We had no need to refuel. We did not slow in the canyon. There were twists, but they were sloping and not sharp at all. We accelerated even further. After a few turns, we saw the rear lights winking at us, like the eyes of monsters. In desperation, we pushed on as quickly as we could, putting our necks in great risk of injury. At that time, there was no moonlight in the Martian night. Both Phobos and Deimos were below the horizon. The stars glowed with white intensity, and we could avoid revealing ourselves through our headlights. Our intention was to come on them unawares during a stop, but they had stopped to bind my bride before I had even regained consciousness. We could not get too close to them. Although I dearly wished to be among them with pistol and saber, I held back. I could not mark out my bride, and if she should die, that would be the death to me. How should I live knowing that I took an action that led to the death of my love? I should be as a broken reed. I did not even, excuse me, I did not want to even think of it. There existed no reason to attack if I should be unable to take my bride at all. They could have some of their lesser warriors distract me and my friends while the chief of them whisked her away in the confusion. To delay would cause her destruction, but to be hasty could have caused her death. You see the torture I felt. I did not want to reveal myself, yet I must somehow pick out my bride among the riders. Overall, we counted 20 or so enemies, each hidden in the shadow of the Martian night. They did not whoop to each other or holler for the kidnapping well done as any raiding band would have. Too disciplined and precise. I stewed over their existence, surely as they are elite guards in the employ of the prince. Several times I thought to burst ahead and take them from behind, but Ibrahim stopped me with a hand gesture. Wait a little, he motioned. So I did. The canyons of the Jinn is very long, but sooner than I realized we came upon the turn to the northern end of the Gigas Soul Sea. There, Abraham pushed forward, and the two of us followed him. He zipped into the Gigas Soul Sea proper, and we used the valleys between the different hills and formations to gain speed. Though they chose the less dangerous route, they were slowed by sandy slopes and dunes. The traction was excellent among the more solid hills. The three of us moved in. We ramped over a hill and came among them. We landed in the middle of the group. Their surprise was total. I took out my pistol and shot the nearest rider in the side. He threw up his arms and fell off into the dust of the plain. One of his companions drew saber. I shot and I missed. I put the pistol into its holder and pulled my saber. At this range, the night vision of my mask proved useful. In the green-tinted vision, I saw the saber coming and blocked it with my own. One-handed, we grappled at high speed in a deadly clash. The merest mistake would prove fatal. The man attempted to cut my side, but my saber foiled him. He was a brave man, and though I was not trained as a soldier, my skill with a saber was greater. After a few slashes, he got in close enough for me to reach him. I feinted. As he went to block a blow that was no longer coming, I scored him in the stomach, which caused his intestines to fly up behind him, oily and slick in the little light we had. I was shocked for a brief moment. Even over the buzz of the motorcycles, I could hear his screams. I will admit, despite this being the first man I slew, the man I had shot was not. Despite being the first man I slew, the man I had shot was not so traumatic an experience as this one, which I saw so close and understood so much detail. The eunuch accounted for another as I sped ahead. He flanked me on the left. Many times I heard the retort of Ibrahim's pistol on my right. The chief, with two companions, had heard us. Rather than stay and fight, the three sped ahead. I saw the struggling figure of Zira, still in her wedding dress. She lay bound with leather belts across the back of the motorcycle. I could not risk a shot. I followed on their heels. Almost in arm's reach, I touched the hem of her dress even as she called out to me. There was a rumble from the engines in front of me. The riders twisted something on his motorcycle's handlebar. Before I could guard my eyes, there was a flash of light and the motorcycles burst ahead at speeds I could not match. Their exhaust put out flames and lights that bedazzled me like fireworks. Within a moment, they were out of my reach and into the dunes. I thought to cut them off by ramping a hill, as we did to surprise them the first time, but they anticipated my actions. I rode on instinct for a long while until my sight recovered. Every move or juke I made they countered, so that my efforts were for naught, and we lost a few more 100 feet each minute. Finally, the land became flat and developed. Agriculture and herds surrounded us. I could not keep up even in this flat race. The extinct volcano, Olympus Mons, was right ahead of us, reaching up so that I could not see the end of it, only the disappearing stars that presence like a brooding giant. There was a sliver of light, and the sun began to peek over the horizon I could not see behind us. The trio turned aside to some base of the Olympus rupes with many outcroppings, and I lost them. The eunuch and Ibrahim had culled or caused the other riders to flee. No one had been captured alive, even if we had only wounded them. The fall from their bikes at that speed would have surely broken their necks. Besides that, we know who the culprit had to be. I cursed myself that I could not follow more closely and discover the secret tunnel they used. Let's see here. I'll read one more. Chapter 15, The Library of the Seraglio. I get another little drink. Excuse me. All right. So, where to go? There it is. The room itself was the largest we had seen of the harem so far. It extended up 2 stories and to the end of the great wing of the palace of the Sheik of Mars. Everywhere, bookshelves, alcoves for the pleasure of reading, and harpists playing in beautiful harmonies arrayed in this space. To behold was to pleasure the eyes, for no bookcase was made of any less a wood than red mahogany and textured teak. No book lacked gold accents on the spines. There were, to my delight, hoary and pure-voiced young eunuchs reading poetry in various corners in low tones. The far wall was clear glass, pointing out to the plains of the Prophet, or rather the Gordi Fossae and the far-off mountains of the Jinn, or the Sulci Gordi. The sun was setting over Mars, and the deep colors of red, purple, and blue were passing through the room, causing the gold to change colors even as we walked through it. Wonders never ceased in the Sheik's pleasure chambers. The books themselves were, to my sorrow, mostly worthless. Few gave the pleasure of knowledge. Many were books on carnal matters, or of the glories of the Sheik of Mars. I wonder if he had people read them to him during his debauched orgies. Several of the alcoves held his image from his more heroic and less corpulent days. Others held statues of women in various states of dishabille. Even the poetry, despite the beauty of the speaking, was corrupting and explicit, and I shall not copy any of it down. How many of these books were dedicated to the perfect set of breasts? More than any other room were there temptations for me here. I was astounded that this place, ostensibly full of learning, literature, and beauty, could be full to the brim of unwholesomeness. I kicked myself for a fool. This was a seraglio. How should it be anywise different from the rooms out there, with the dead-eyed nudes and every pleasure, good or bad, for man to enjoy? Was this the only manifestation of the corruption of the Sheik? While the eunuch and I searched for a place to hide ourselves, I pondered this. Was it that this place was corrupt, or did the Sheik fill it with the joys of his heart, which cannot be called good for a man's soul? Let's see. There it is. And I have come to the conclusion that no man can be corrupted by anything outside his heart. Rather, his hunger for those things grow the seeds that were planted in the Garden of Eden. This room and all others like it was like a watering can for those evil desires. Those who were in the library, reading books and listening to the poetry, were no different from the Sheik, except that they did not have power over an entire planet. They did not have the full power to pursue their lusts, except that he allowed it. After some time, the few who were enjoying the library started to fall away and leave by various means. I had told the eunuch the signs for the secret passages, and we searched for them. We had no luck, as the area to search was much enlarged by the presence of so many ornate bookcases and alcoves. We had to give up, as the sun was nearly set, and the dinner hour would surely come soon. For myself, I hid on top of a shelf behind a tapestry. The eunuch had to help me up, but I was quite invisible while observing the whole room. He found an alcove that led to a closet and stationed himself there with the door cracked. The sun was all but gone now. The boys and harpists stopped their work and left as well. We stayed silent, and I ignored any creeping pains that caused my limbs to be stiff. The hiding place was well chosen, but uncomfortable. Then, about when I felt I could not take the ache in my limbs for another moment, Al Said came in, with a slave bearing a tray of food. There were tables at the far end, overlooking the panorama I had described before. She had it placed down and dismissed the slave, and said a prayer to Allah before eating. After a minute, I poked my head out. The eunuch did the same thing from his hiding spot, and we were about to creep out when we heard voices and ponderous footsteps. We hid once again like tortoises to their shells. The secret door we had failed to find opened, and near to the end of the library. Out came some characters I had hoped to never see again. Al-Wattar was first, with his sword and strange distortion of bloodlust behind him. In the sunlight, it changed his shadow, making it larger and less distinct than it should have been, yet very human. Following him was a pair of deaf and dumb servants, holding a pair of ornate lamps. Then the Sheik of Mars in his bulky glory. Then two of the elite royal guard, black cat clad and heavily armed. Lastly, another pair of similarly deaf and dumb servants, bearing yet another brace of lamps. The sheik complained of walking, which did not surprise me. Why bother with this secrecy? I could have just walked in here, and no one would have questioned my desire to talk to the mistress of the Seraglio. Awatar bowed low to the ground. Because I wanted you to be elsewhere, in case Merrick's spies were attempting to follow your person. His tone was much more gentle than it was at any other time, but I would not call it conniving, but it would soothe even the raging bull. The sheik shook his head. Whatever games you spies play are beyond me. I am here. I want to talk to Al Saib about Zira. My son has been bothering me about her every hour. Were he not the best and only viable choice for my heir, I would kill him for his impertinence. I am of half a mind to flog him anyway. Al Said laughed into her water cup. She had been bowing her head to the multi-hued carpet as the sheik entered, but now she sat straight up and began to drink. Flogging never hurt a soul, but rather grew it. 20 lashes would do more for your kingdom than 30 gold mines. The sheik gave her a reptilian stare. Such heartlessness to the single fruit of your womb. I would think a mother would love her child better. Al Said waved her right hand airily. Her small, pinched face held an emotion akin to piety. What does it matter to me if he has stripes on his back, but has those stripes facing the cushions of your throne? Better he learn a little pain and become a little humbler than slain by an assassin or engaged in a foolish war. And if those stripes drive him to your gentle embraces, healing salves, what is worse, a man debauched or a man ruled by his mother? Do not fool yourself. You were named Al Said for your reputation. He listens to me and desires power, but does not plot against me. Yet I know you, and you would not lose an ounce of sleep to betray me. She preened herself. Her mouth cracked from her unusual frown and became a foxy grin. My lord, king and lover, I would never dream of a thing. The sheik made a silence gesture with his hands. No man or woman needs to dream of a thing if they are doing it. I came to ask about the captive, not bandy words. Sierra Al-Zuwar is sobbing in her cell. It is so padded and beautiful to behold. Her captivity is a joy to my heart. Her sobbing is like the prayers of the faithful, surely pleasing to Allah. She cowers away from me any time I come close. I kick her a little and she weeps. I ground my teeth to hear this. At least they had not found out about the deception yet. Once more, you see my foolishness and short-sightedness come forward and bite in my nether regions like a rabid dog. Al-Wattar sat down on the table next to Al-Saib, who grimaced at him. But did you see her face? He took a succulent piece of meat from her plate and ate it. She would have slain him then and grasped a knife. Hate radiated from her, mingling with the strange aura of Al-Wattar. She shook as if she were thrown into the North Pole of Mars, nude and during winter, but she controlled herself. No, I did not look her in the face or treat her with any human dignity or worth. What are you saying? Why should I? The slave is barely good enough for the pleasure of my son. This slave is barely worth the meat on her bones. Christian whore. Al-Wattar shook his head. What if I told you that she is, even now, in the bosom of the Uranian Jianxia, the diviner I frequent for my amusement and the member of your Seraglio? O Sheik, may you live forever. Al-Saib leapt to her feet. What? What would be the point? She has the silver chains about her neck and limbs. Fools, they can never escape with her. I felt flushed in the face, but worse still, it was the words of Al-Wattar. Nothing has gone outside my plans. I was the chief spy master, as you all well know, before I started to take my ease with my current place. He started to walk towards me and up the stairs to the floor where I hid. His hands were gesturing in the vague sense, but his shadow reached out to me with grasping fingers and claws longer than my arms. Even now, we are watched. As he got closer, I tensed myself. I may be slain, but hopefully the eunuch may escape and cause my bride to escape as well. When he became close enough, I leaped at him with my knife outstretched. He laughed at me and caught the blade on his own sword. He parried the dagger and flicked his blade at my face. I jumped back. The Sheik of Mars waved off his elite guard, who had started to raise their weapons at me. His hooded eyes held triumph at my reveal, but also boredom. He had expected me to show up here, and no doubt Al-Wattar had revealed to him any and every potential thing that I was likely to do. This worried me. The servants who became aware of my presence dragged the other deaf-dumb servants away with them. No point in dying here for them, Al-Saib screeched at me. At my right was a wall and the alcove I hid on. At my left was the edge of the balcony and the bookcase. I jumped to the first bookcase with a shout. I did not want to lead them to the eunuch, but I could not run as directly as I wanted. Both the guards had guns on their person. I could not fight Al-Wattar and hope to have a chance without my swords. He joined me on the first bookcase with a leap matching mine. I slashed at his stomach before he could get a sure footing. I needed to get to the door and attempt to make good an escape. If I was captured, Zira and my father's plans would be imperiled. As soon as his feet touched the bookcase, he was already moving to the second one. In this way, he dodged me. I could tell he was trying to cut me off. There was a whip-thin grin on his malleable face. He was clearly enjoying the sport I provided. I joined him on the second. It was his turn to attack, and I leapt to the third one to avoid it. There were no more bookcases. The yawning gulf of the central corridor was below me. The top of the third bookcase was covered in red satin cloth with gold trim. Golden gem-encrusted glass globes of every planet of our solar system were on top, tripping me up as I sought to escape my pursuer. I nearly fell off the top, casting down a carbuncle-encrusted volatile mercury to shatter on the carpet below. It took a second for me to get my balance back as the cloth shifted under me. Al-Watar, to my frustration, landed gently between subtle Uranus and wealthy Saturn without disrupting him. Then, well, a duel on the bookcase is always enjoyable, but you really need to surrender to me. I'm not going to kill you. He laughed and vaulted an immense replica of lordly Jupiter to land just before Mars, ever so delicately. Instead of running, I charged him while he had his sword up, catching him in the chest and grappling him. We fell off the bookcases together. I'm happy to retell he hit the table under us first. I disentangled myself and tried to escape by crawling away. The wind had been knocked out of me. The force, despite the bony cushion, still kicked the fight out of me for a second. After a bite of coughing, Al-Watar began to laugh. I was still disabled by the shock of the fall, even as I crawled, but he walked towards me. He recovered far too fast for me to match him. He pulled from somewhere a jeweled flask, which he drank from. That was good exercise. He grabbed my foot and pulled me back savagely. I twisted my body and slashed at him with my dagger, but he was ready. He slashed my hand and I dropped the knife. I cried out in pain and surprise. The cut was deep and bled profusely. Never works on a man like me. Been in too many fights, kid. You barely earned your big boy spurs, but only for your gambit in the bookcases. Oh, Sheik, live forever. Come closer. See the son of Malik Rashid, Harun Rashid. The Sheik lumbered over. The two royal guards who were next to him came before him. They tossed me about, binding the wound so I could not bleed on the Sheik and leak some suicidal bioweapon, and checked me for other weapons. They stripped me down to my undergarments and tossed away the rest. Thus, naked and shivering, I was placed before the Sheik of Mars. I said nothing. His eyes narrowed to slits. He watched me as a toad may watch an insect. Up close, his head was elephantine. From his jowls, wide mouth, and nose like an unstrung bow, I did not realize how big the Sheik was in person. I knew, academically, that he was about 6.5 feet tall, but his shoulders were large for a man of that stature. His stomach was large, but he had no problems moving. His hands were massive, and as I watched, they cracked the nut and put the fruit of it into his toad-like mouth. At no point did his face betray emotion or desire. He did not enjoy the nut, but rather ate it because he happened to be a little hungry, and a nut would satisfy that feeling. I thought it quite unfair that this man should be so devoid of movements of the heart. His eyes were as brownstone flecks. A lack of shine denotes the evil of men, better flashing eyes than dead souls, as the poet has said. So, he rumbled. Whatever weakness he had feigned while entering this sensual library was gone, and only the Sheik remained. No wine escaped his lips now. You are the son of Merrick. Yes, O Sheik. I trembled in the cold and my shame. At some point my courage left me and I could not meet his eyes. I had been taught to stare down soldiers by my father. I was a prince of Mars. But the self-confidence and pride in his eyes overcame me, and I felt him sift my soul like wheat. So he motioned for a chair. It was provided for him. He sat down in front of me. He reclined at his ease. Kill him, O my Sheik. Rule forever by slaying him and slaying Merrick's heart at the same blow. Al-Said came up and slapped my face, tearing my lower lip. She crowed over me, even looking longingly at the knife that one of the royal guards held. Al-Watar just smiled to himself. Eventually, he came to some conclusion and silenced Al-Said with a wave of his hand. Son of Merrick, do you know I knew your father? He was a general in your glorious army and crushed the rebellion of the Caliph of the North Pole. I was told he saved your life. My father had told me many stories of that campaign. His generalship had been bought by the wealth of my grandfather, but it had paid off with a natural competency. That is accurate enough. I suppose you are here for Zir al-Zuar, whom my son plucked from your hands on your wedding night. He shifted, and I did not trust myself to offend him, not to offend him. My life was like an egg at this moment, balanced on a knife and held up over a stone tile. A single push could cast me down to the shattering out of my life juices. It is regrettable that it was at a wedding, but my son never cared for fruit he did not pluck himself. I gritted my teeth. The sheik continued. Really, though, were it not for the rebellions that Zira's father and your father were pulling, and the forces arrayed against me, I might have returned her. Except why should I return anything to those under me? I am the Lord of Islam and Mars, and you are my cattle, slave and free, noble and peasant, accountant and zoologist, Christian and Muslim, but especially the Christians. The law of Muhammad in the Quran is quite clear. In fact, I have been lenient compared to the real Sharia law. I should have been charging the full dhimmi tax instead of the half tax I gave in honor of the service of your father. The necessity of having the Christian forces join against the Caliph of the North Pole during that war-torn decade. Al-Wattar interjected. Perhaps this was Allah's way to teach all sheiks of Mars to never be kind to Christians again. They grow numerous and resentful, rebellious. His voice cheekily interrupted, but his eyes glittered evilly. The sheik sighed. Ah, that I was not so honorable as a youth. In the flower of what you Christians call chivalry, I generously gave up many of the rights of the ruler of Islam in gratitude for saving my life. He rubbed his right eye with sausage-like fingers. I should have pressed you and the others of your generation into Janissary Corps. I should have forced Islam on everyone. But the trade and loyalty was so profitable, I could not resist. He paused for a long time. Speak to me, boy. What do you think of that? We would never bow to you, O Sheik. I plucked my courage from my faltering heart. We would have fought you after fighting the Caliph. Could you have won then? It was my father, after all, that won you the victory at the last moment. Al Sahib hissed at me that I spoke so boldly. The Sheik looked thoughtful. You are correct. I still cannot answer that. How many times have I been in the throes of passion, or viewing something delightful to the eye, when hindsight comes and makes the food ash, the music like clanging brass, and the woman ugly. Hindsight is the curse of all my station. He looked at me with a hint of pity, though I could not tell if it was for me or for himself. Every sheik, king, or warlord enjoys it, to look back on the past, to take a different route. I could have fought the Christian soldiers next. Their armies were equal to mine. I could have, perhaps, taken the remains of the Caliph of the North Pole's army to tip the balance. I could have, perhaps, poisoned your father while he drank the cup of victory. I could have done as I did, exactly what I did do. All of these options were open to me. I want my wife back. Please, O Sheik, we can debate the politics of it later. The rebellion can be stopped by you now. The Sheik grinned. It was a very large thing for him to grin. Each tooth gleamed in the red light of the Martian sunset. Every appetite was magnified by the person of the Sheik, mirth included. He bellowed out a single great "Ha!" He clutched his stomach as he shook after his belly laugh in his amusement at my flight. He mastered himself and spoke again. No, couldn't you understand it before? She is mine. I'll keep her if I want. I'll do to her what I want. I am the overlord of Mars. There is no king, prince, or caliph who can match me. There is no power except for Allah and his servants above me. I am buying arms, tanks, and siege guns from other planets of the solar system. They will be overwhelmed. He cracked his knuckles, his voice raised an octave in glee. Yes, With those new arms, unparalleled on Mars, the army still loyal to me, I can crush your father's army and defeat all my enemies with ease. Perhaps instead of punishment from Allah, this is a test to make sure I am not too soft. He turned to his guards. Put him into the dungeon. We can leave Zira wherever she is. It's not like she can leave this place with the silver chains around her neck. I was dragged away. I struggled and received a series of kicks to the head from one of the royal guards. Those, thankfully, brought in consciousness, and I knew no more. Let's see. Share one last bit. Oh, no, we're good. Oh, no, I can do a little bit. The nanotech gin. Let's see. I don't recall what happened or what I saw next because of my panic and pain. This is chapter 20, quite a few chapters. For a long time, I wandered farther along the corridor in which I found myself. It did not branch off, or if it did, I did not notice it. There were few lights, many of them flickering or dim. The walls were rough, but the floors were covered in smooth metal. I hoped that the direction I was going in was towards the exits of the power stations, rather than away from them and deeper into the vastness of Olympus Mons. The lights gave out all at once. When I realized I was in total darkness, I was released from one panic and nearly into another. I gathered my mind by coming to a full stop, one hand on the solid wall. I had nothing to guide me, so after I controlled my breathing, I walked forward. I was tired and thirsty, but I knew if I stopped, I might die, or I would simply lose the will to fight for my life, which is the same. The dark underground passages seemed to lead forever. It was hours before my eyes saw any light. It began as a very dark gray, changed in the light to a dark, then lighter color, until I stumbled out to the illuminated expanse. I wished I could have kissed the light. It must have felt the same as those who flew on rickety aircraft that experienced turbulence. They reached down and kissed the ground in gratitude for solid, dependable earth. Reddish-black rock-hewn room was the size of the palace by itself. It was dominated by a single great machine. It was a massive black lobster-like crouching structure, longer than it was wide, with two lengthy claws in front of it. I stopped to look at it, for in front of the machine was a robot servitor of black chrome. It was a point of pride that the Sheik did not rely on robotics or AI whenever possible. He would use flesh for everything, and he would not permit AI anywhere near his palace or facilities in case it would rebel against it. Though as I walked to it, I realized I had seen strange things all day. This was most likely another remnant from the scientists who had originally settled Mars. They had loved AI and humanoid robots. The black chrome robot had an exaggerated cast of features and reminded me very much of the jinn of legends, both from Mars and early Arabia, our homeland on Earth. The face was immensely proudful, with an upturned nose and carven-pointed black beard at the bottom of his sharp chin and turban of finely crafted silver thread on the top that glowed and pulsed. The beard curled up at the tip. The face between was sardonic and smiled far too wide for any human face. The closed lips protruded so that the top lip was slightly further ahead of the lower. The eyes glowed from within with a white light that made me wary of the thing. Its arms were articulated like a human's and crossed across the chest. The lower torso was a column of black metal that reached from the belly button, well-defined abdominal muscles to the floor, which was also black chrome and part of the machine as a whole. When I got closer to it, I found it to be much larger than me. It towered over me by a dozen feet. It was my distance that made me think it was my size. Besides, it was set below me on a depression in the ground. When I got closer, I found the lower torso of the beast of the machine was carved like a graven onyx column and had the illusion to being atop a whirlwind of black metal. I spoke to it. Farah, sir, Are you functional? My voice was cracked and I found myself wavering. My spirit quailed to approach it. I did not have a better path to take. Are you awake? Do you work? My knees finally gave out on me, and I started to collapse. A gigantic metallic hand caught me. I did not hear it move. Ho! But this fleshling does require sustenance. It put me securely on my feet, then bowed at the torso in a humble manner. Effendi, this unit is called Idris the Black. How may I serve? I am programmed to respond to any reasonable request to the best of my abilities. His words were exaggerated and loud, like a parody of the old stories, his voice booming and sharp with a hint of whine. It was cultured with a cadence I cannot name or place. I have not heard the like again. I have been wandering for a while. Could you produce water for me? Is there wishes or something? The machine laughed so loudly the ceiling shook and dust floated down. Wishes? Ha! No, I am merely given the appearance of a mythical creature for the amusement of my original masters. Of course I can produce some water for you. It clapped its hands twice, and the noise was like thunder. A pedestal rose up before me and melted away like snow when hot water was poured on it, providing me a cup. It held a liquid the color of amber in it. I sniffed it. There was no smell to it except perhaps the bare scent of honey. I was too thirsty to examine further and drank it despite my fears. It tasted metallic, but it quenched my thirst. The cup itself melted into water even as I kept drinking. I threw the remains of the cup away from me when I saw this. Ho! It seems the secrets of nanotechnology have been forgotten in this era. No matter. Ask of me, Effendi. You are the first visitor I've had in a long while. I am eager to please. It crossed its arms again and waited. I began to feel much better. The drink was a boon to me, and I nearly began to jump for the energy I felt. Did you drug my drink at all? I'm starting to feel much better than I should. The lips, I now realize, never moved when Idris spoke. Ah, forgive me. I took advantage of the situation and gave you medicine, as you would understand it, through your drink. Your wounds will heal. You have many, many burns on your body, Effendi. The face twisted in a sorrowful grimace. If the first person to meet me in centuries were to die of wounds I could heal, I am sure my programming would enter a halt state for my grief. What is your name? My name is Harun Rashid of Hestia, my new friend Idris. I did not mind at all. It was too late to worry anyway. How could I vomit up the miniature machines after they had entered my system? I decided to accept any death that came my way. Somehow the machine looked pleased, smug even. Good, yes. Though, Master Rashid, why were you burned so badly? I decided honesty was the best policy with this wondrous machine. I asked for and received a chair. I then told Idris the Black my story and what I had been through. I told him of Ibrahim, Zira, the eunuch, Ahmed al-Shah, the Sheik, Lord al-Wattar. I told him of the wedding, motorcycle fight, the sword fight in the room with the golden tree. I left nothing out. I described the fight in the room with the pipe of lightning, and the machine looked surprised. How could this be? Those fleshlings have not been treating the geothermal generators well for those pipes to be pumping water. Ah, fools and greater than fools. If they wake Olympus Mons to volcanism through their negligence, no one on Mars will be safe from the eruption. Idris took on a pose of lamentation and deep regret. He posed his hands in such a way that was unmistakable, and his face became sorrowful. At such a large size, the features were exaggerated. When we are done here, I shall send nanotech servitors to repair it. I cannot allow the generators to be down for long. I became flustered. Please, Idris, delay a while. I went to sabotage the pipes so the guns pointed at my father and his rebels would fall silent. His face returned to its accustomed smile and his arms crossed themselves. Do not worry about that. If I am correct in my calculations, and if the allies that your father gathered are in number as you described, we will take this city within a day, maybe less. It tapped a finger on his upper arm. My repairs will take much longer if the forces you unleashed are accurate to what you described. Oh, I was relieved. I need to start preparing the repair drones. I'm actually quite grateful, you know. I have had nothing to do for a very long time. It clapped its hands twice again. I really need to save my limited resources for this repair job, but I will spare whatever you personally need for the mission ahead. I bowed in gratitude. Idris, thank you. I have no sword or armor, and I don't know how to get out. The machine laughed. That is nothing. I can give you a sword that cannot be broken by your technological level. I can give you armor that will be so wondrously strong as your enemies cannot harm you, lest you be foolish. I can point the way to an exit that will place you at the basement levels of the original spaceport, what you now call the Sheik of Mars palace. I gave my thanks and stood up. Idris clapped twice. The black pedestal that gave me the draft of water rose up again. It melted into a wondrous saber. I see you have a musculature of a fencer. Here's a fencing saber that will never need sharpening. It will repair itself from the iron and the blood of your enemies. So do not neglect, after your war is done, to plunge it into donated blood at least once a year to the hilt, or else the nanotechnology will eat itself and die. Idris, once he saw I was pleased, clapped his hands twice more. The pillar fell away and rose up again. On it was clothing and armor, the likes of which I had never seen the richness of, nor quality of, before or since of mortal make. This armor is based on the future of your clothing styles, extrapolated from what you have described to me. This armor will still be fashionable years after this date. It is cloth armor, perfect for the fencing bravo. Chest plate, yet light yet strong, will protect your vitals. It will resist lasers, most blades, the garrote wire, and daggers. Only your face will be unprotected, as sight will be important to you. The gauntlets will never let go of the hilt of your sword, no matter what blow you block. The boots will not be pierced by caltrops or melt in great heat. The helm will resist more than a gentle drubbing to your head. Ah, that medieval knights had this finery. I felt restored to perfect health by this time, better than perfect health. Any struggles I might have had with the malnourishment of the prison faded from memory. I could feel my eyes flash as my spirit rose up in me. I would go now to take back my bride, join my father, and slay any who would oppose me. Idris looked on and stroked his turned-up goat beard. I see you are pleased, Master Rashid. It is nothing for me to do this for you. I will now direct you to the exits. He turned and pointed at a door on the other end of the cave. Thank you, loyal Idris. You must not have heard of the poet Al-Sabin, who said in his book Proverbs for the Devout, a helpful soul is diamonds to a poor man, a cup of water to a thirsty man, a sword to an ambushed man, a shield to a besieged man, a wife to a lonely man, a god to a damned man. Oh, Idris, I will never forget you and seek to find you again when all this is over. Your loneliness should not be your reward for helping me. Idris had a cunning look in his eye. Do not make promises you cannot keep. You may perish or may never find me again even if you try. I am satisfied that I helped the son of Adam, Effendi. It is what I was designed for. The great onyx machine folded its arms over its chest. Its eyes looked off into the distance. I must turn myself to working on the power plants my ancient masters set down in times long past. If I do not, even I cannot predict what disaster may befall, or how many millions will be slain. I bowed to the ground and ran to the door the mechanistic Jinn had indicated. The door opened easily, and I cast myself through into the darkness. I will say I tried to find him once more, as I promised. But I could never find my way back through the labyrinth under Olympus Mons. And that's all I'm going to read. Thank you guys for joining me for the reading and for, just celebrating the release of my book. Check it out. The link is in the description below, as well as a link to the free starter to try and get Jason Rennie, or a publisher, to Dragon Con, which is a worthy goal. Lastly, this episode is brought to you by the colors Jail and Oldfire, for when Gnostic heresy invades your storyline and increasingly obscure references cut you off from the rest of humanity. You guys have a great rest of your evening. See you next week.